Hi, I'm Sumedha Mohan, a high school junior from Lagos, Nigeria, and I'm your host on the Canary for this week. Let's begin by giving a countdown of the articles that have been published this week at the Teen Pop magazine. Thanks to Vineet Ajit's grounding article on equality last week, we have two more equity-based articles this week. Trisha Binwade's Equity in the Classroom and Abhirami's Equity in the Dejected Commoner. Fighting the battle of equality, we also have Aditri Singh and her article, The Odds Deserve to Become the Evens Too, which talks about LGBTQ rights. On the other hand, Favor, Joshua Bill, and Ishita Rawat present poems titled Conquer Your Fears and The Urge Not to Be Shy, respectively. Teaching us about self-love and depression, we have Shreya G.A.'s Unknown to Yourself, an emotional dilemma, and Aditya Kashyap's Energy of Self-Love. Furthermore, we are successfully being guided by three women in various arenas, with Riddhi Bhattacharya guiding us with two interesting facts about period 4 elements, Megha Puskar guiding us on how to make collages and wallpapers, and Danielle Dixon guiding us with K-pop. Finally, we have the best article of this week, People and Their Happy Pleasures, written by Nandana Sheri. Nandana will now be joining us for a small chat. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Sumedha. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great too, thank you. So, to begin with, what was your inspiration for writing this wonderful article?
So a few months ago, I had my half yearlies and I was late into the night of revising everything for a physics examination. And my mother was laying down on the couch next to me. And I looked at her and I was like, things would have been easier back in your day, right? With less amount of, distractions, so you could study in peace. And she was like, yeah, that is true. And I realized that every single story we've been told about our parents' childhood is about the work they had to put in and poverty and everything that they had been through and how easy it is for us. But every era has its own problems and it has its own pleasures. So I just wanted to write down, the simpler things back in the day, as they say. So I thought about it, and after my exam got over, I wrote it down.
Well, that's absolutely amazing. So, moving on to our next question. Do you think your generation would reminisce and prefer this time period in their future?
Well, for the reminisce part, 100%, because I'm positive everyone enjoyed their childhood. And anytime you think about that, there is going to be a feeling of nostalgia that's going to, sort of take over you. And I loved my childhood, if I have to speak for myself. But would all of them prefer this time period in the future? I'm not sure. I can't speak for an entire generation. But in my part, I would. Because as we progress further, technology is only going to get, broadened with its opportunities in robotics and everything that we see. So we might look back at these days with so much of technology and look at how things were simpler back in the day. Maybe, in the future when we have robots for friends, we'll look back and say, oh yeah, things were simpler. We only had phones and laptops back in the day. So every era, as I said, has its own beauty, but definitely this would be a time I would look back and have a smile on my face when I think about it.
Yes, very true. I believe that's the same for me. And like you said, it's very perspective and it depends on each individual. So yes, that absolutely answers our question.
Truly.
Yes, so let's move on to the next question. In your article, you mentioned a lot of nostalgic memories. So were they inspired by your grandparents or your parents' stories, or were they figments of your own imagination?
Oh, yes, 100% inspired from what I have heard. I don't know how true all these stories that have been passed down from our grandparents and parents are. But yes, my father grew up in the village in Kottayam, which is a small town in Kerala, India. And the circumstances that he grew up in, or my parents grew up in, with respect to how I was raised, or the situation I've been raised in, is very different, not only because of the difference in generation, but I'm being raised in a completely different country. So exposure, opportunities, even economically, how prosper we are. So those ways, they always talk about how difficult it was, right, back in those times. But
Yeah.
again, this simplicity factor, I would say, because, well, children in the 80s and the 90s, they didn't have a lot of mental health issues, which is so common in today's world with how fast we're going. Anxiety, depression, those are all thrown around by every 12, 13-year-old. As you reach adolescence, it's like mental health is a question of time for it to degrade. But so definitely these were inspired from what I have heard and what has been told to me as grandmother tales. But yes, definitely they are inspired. I can't cook up all these wonderful stories. I don't have that amazing of an imagination.
Yes, absolutely. I totally and completely agree with what you just put forth. And it's amazing to know that, people are looking forward to things like depression and anxiety, like you mentioned, and they're putting so much effort to bringing it up in the society and making sure that it's just not words that are thrown around. So yes, absolutely.
Yes, sure.
So you mentioned the elephant ride in your article. So have you ever been on an elephant ride?
Actually, no. I've been on a camel ride. Does that count? Because I live in Muscat, Oman, so it's a desert. So we've been on camel rides when we were younger, but I've not been on an elephant ride, mainly because the time where elephants are common in Kerala is during Ulsavam, which literally translates to festival. These are beautiful festivals and temples. So they would have parades of elephants, as my mother has told me several times, and they'd be adorned with top to bottom jewelry. And this is during the months of January to March, April. And so I've never been in India at that point of time. So I would love to be, but I've never been.
So would you like to share some experience of your camel ride?
Well, I was very young, I'll be honest with you. It was in these sand dunes. It's called Wahiba Sands. It's a beautiful place in Muscat. Anyone who comes here must definitely go to Wahiba Sands. So you have this sort of desert life there, set up in tents, and you're eating on like these little mats that they put up for you. And camel rides are all very common at that point of time.
Well, that's wonderful to hear about. And well, our viewers, whoever goes to Muscat, please be sure to visit this place.
Yes, sure. Wahiba Sands. I'll take you.
So, moving on to our next question. In your article, you talk about the essence of people learning about their origins and cultures rather than trying to be woke. How important do you find this?
Well, I don't mean to disregard being woke. I think the entire concept of being woke is about being aware socially, politically, about the injustices that are faced in society. But at one point of time, I think it's moved from being aware to being aware of whatever is trending. So if we take the example of the American US elections as well, everyone, I'm positive, knows top to bottom about President Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. But how many of these so-called woke people know about Indian politics or know about what's going on in their own country? So it shouldn't be about what is popular on social media or what is everyone talking about. I should know that. And that is the boundary to which I should know. So we should really explore our culture, our tradition, because as an NRI, for me, it's sort of a bond between my family and me, especially my grandparents. When you speak in that mother tongue or embrace your festivals, the food, the clothing, it gives you this feeling of oneness with people you don't necessarily share a homeland with, as I don't live in India. But embracing that Indian culture and identity is very important to me. So I feel I pity the children whose parents have sort of protected them from like not speaking their mother tongue because it might ruin their English accent or whatnot. Because essentially they're losing out on a little part of themselves, which make you who you are.
Yes, absolutely. And it is one note to be taken that following the crowd doesn't always fit right to everyone. So you must find your own voice in the crowd.
Exactly.
And I believe that is what has been majorly highlighted in a part of your article. And it's amazing and it's incredible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, wonderful. So let's move on to our next question. According to you, what were the best and the worst things about the following eras? So let's first talk about the 1950s.
Well, the 1950s, now let's talk with respect to India. It's post colonialism. So it's this dawn of a new independent India. And because the Indian markets weren't all open to foreigners as of yet, so there was a lot of debt which was caused by, colonialism sort of handicapped our economy, and all of these markets were bringing a comeback. They were making a comeback. So I think that was one of the best parts, because definitely Indian markets could thrive at that point of time. And
Yes.
the worst part probably would be the casteism. I think with segregation and everything being so stark with the British Raj, we weren't rid of that yet. So this low class, high class, and the different castes, to this day, it's quite prevalent, the riots and
Yes,
the communal
absolutely.
riots. Yeah, so if it's so prevalent even in today's world, how bad must have that been in the 1950s? That is something we should really look at.
Yes, absolutely. So now let's talk about the 1980s.
Well, the 80s, I think it's a really good time, especially 80s, 90s, because technology had sort of just come about. So we have TVs, we have telephone, we have radio. But at the same time, we weren't slaves to technology. Our eyes weren't always glued to a screen, and our hands weren't always glued to a phone. So that way, I would say that letter writing, that still existed. But fax, telegram, phones, all of that were also there. So that was probably the best part. Also the fashion. I think fashion was like, you look back at old photos and you're like, oh, shoulder pads, all of them, they look really good. And
Yes.
Right, exactly. And the worst part, I would say, probably equality. I think still women were sort of the conservative part of society still existed, and to this day it does. But again, equality in terms of gender might have been a big problem back in those days, where women still weren't completely allowed to go for work, and the extent of maybe child marriages, all of that did exist in the 80s, 20, 30 years ago.
Yes, absolutely. I believe that was the time period when individuals, particularly women, began realizing that, yes, I have a voice of my own. So it was a major revolution that started at that point. So, yes.
Right, the beginning of, we can say, feminism, or at least a voice for equality.
Yes, absolutely. Now, let's move on to a very recent time, 2010.
Well, the 2010s was my childhood personally, and I'm not going to tell anything bad about it, but I loved my childhood. I'll be honest with you. Anytime, how they always talk about how your 20s are going to be the most dynamic time period, changing events of your life. There's so much happening in your 20s, but my childhood was so good that my 20s need to be something else to top that off. So the best part would probably be all the fun. I can't talk about adults here because I'm too nostalgic about the 2010s. Again, we also had, even though I am Gen Z, we didn't have that sort of childhood where we were 11, 12 and TikTok had taken over our lives. So there was still an amount of commotion outside our homes where we'd go out to play hide and seek and coco and catch. Those were all common things. Going out to play wasn't some foreign concept. I don't know how many children of today genuinely go out and just take a breath of fresh air and enjoy themselves, because we're all so focused on social media where every 10, 11-year-old has a phone better than I do.
Essentially glued to a gadget.
Exactly. So the fact that we weren't we had that sort of fun childhood where we were going outside and we've skinned our knees, we've fallen on our faces, that would probably be the best part.
And any small glimpse of maybe not worst but something bad or not very good?
maybe the fights. As children, the things we take seriously are so silly that now we look back and we're like, why did we even quarrel over that? So friendships were tested, but that probably petty fights, that was probably the worst part.
Yes, absolutely. So now let's get to some fun. We have a game that's called First Word First, where I'll mention some words related to your article and you would have to state the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear it. And there's a catch, you'll have to say it within 5 seconds.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Okay, so I've got 10 words, so shall we begin?
Okay, fire it
So
up.
the first word, paradigm.
A model, something, some sort of plot. That's what's coming to my head first.
All right, brilliant.
So a model.
Revolution.
Revolution is voices being heard. There's a lot of protest, but in a good way. Change for something new.
Yes, absolutely. Transformation.
Transformation, again, a change, radical might be. But again, I think let's be positive here for a new, more progressive era.
Great. Meteor.
Meteor, some sort of employment, a job that you're passionate about.
Yes, very nice. Days of yore.
Days of yore. I think the good old days. That's how our grandparents would describe the 70s and 80s and how when they were bachelors.
Yes,
Days of
absolutely. Wonderful. Elephants.
Elephants are majestic. I think huge, majestic, very wise. And again, it's the Ulsavam that I described before. These beautiful headpieces that they're adorned with on their entire trunk. It's very, very beautiful sight.
Yeah, absolutely. Heritage.
Heritage is a part of us that we are or we need to be proud of.
Yes, very true. Woke.
Woke is, well, there's two ways to describe it, but one way would definitely be being aware of our surroundings and politically and socially aware of not only the injustices we face, but problems of others.
Yes, absolutely.
And at the same time, following a trend.
Yes, very true. Divinity.
Divinity is spirituality, some sort of force that greater than ourselves that we can't clearly explain.
Great, wonderful. Radio.
Radio, this is my probably a movie scene. I don't know, the first thing that's coming to my head is a couple of boys that are huddled around this one radio trying to listen to the cricket match results during the World Cup.
Very fun, wonderful. So those are our 10 words, and I put these 10 words together, and person to person, you played amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Wonderful. So thank you so much for joining us today, Nandana. It was an absolute pleasure being able to speak to you.
Thank you for having me, Sumedha. It was a pleasure talking to you too.
Now, in case you haven't, go check out the new theme song by Naitik, which is even playing in the background, by the way. As you are checking out the theme song, check out the interviews with leading fitness coach Arya Talwalkar, popular singer Ashwin Advani, and cartoonist Meg Adams at theteenpop.com. Finally, if you wish to join us as a writer, interviewer, designer, or NGO who wishes to be a part of Growth with the Teen Pop campaign, then check out our website at theteenpop.com. And that's a wrap. Thank you for joining me. Stay tuned for the next episodes of The Canary, hosted by other fellow writers, and I will see you again in a month.
Hi guys, I'm Madeleine Monkman, a high school senior living in the United States. I write articles that bring awareness to civil rights, climate change, free healthcare, and immigration, and today I am your second co-host on The Canary, and I am going to be taking you across kind of a more recent update of the United States election, also kind of just United States politics in general. So around 8:46 Pacific Standard Time on Thursday evening, President-elect Joe Biden won the state of Arizona, bringing his lead of 290 electoral votes to Trump's 270 electoral votes up, and Arizona hasn't voted for a Democratic president since 1996, so once again this is a really historical moment. After Trump's insults towards late Senator John McCain. I think the people of Arizona really, changed their tune about him, and they kind of came through in the end and really brought Biden the victory. So, obviously words have an impact, and especially mean ones. So, North Carolina and Georgia are the last states to be called still, and they are also being determined as too close, though North Carolina is most likely going to be a red state, and Georgia is a blue. So Trump has been rumored to have told advisors that if Joe Biden is certified as the election winner, he will announce a 2024 campaign for president. This is still, just a little rumor. It hasn't been verified by anyone. However, knowing the kind of person Trump is, I highly doubt he would, not pass up the chance to take over the country again. So, in Pennsylvania, where the Trump campaign has filed multiple lawsuits, a judge sided with their campaign, believe it or not, and ordered counties not to count a small number of mail-in or absentee ballots for which the voter didn't submit a valid ID within 6 days after the November 3rd election. And the judge was Mary Hannah Leavitt. There's not much known about her. I think she's just, a Commonwealth judge. And, the Trump campaign general counsel, Matt Morgan, claims that this was a big win. However, the ballots are unlikely to affect the outcome of the state just because there are only like a few thousand. Biden still holds a margin of 55,000 as of Thursday night, and Trump still refuses to concede, and he's being backed not only by his campaign but by other Republican allies such as Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell, which is honestly no surprise. So, despite his efforts though, several former U.S. and foreign leaders have pushed Trump to concede because his actions do put national security and American democracy in a really awkward position. Trump also fired his defense secretary, Mark Esper, this week via tweet. Yes, he fired him in a tweet. And it's rumored Trump will begin to remove senior officers, resulting in the nation's national security becoming endangered, obviously. This is a reckless decision, according to Representative Adam Smith and anyone with a brain. And department officials have claimed that Trump could initiate operations against Iran during his last days in office, which is really scary. Former Pentagon official Representative Elisa Slotkin says that there could be a few reasons to fire Secretary of Defense with 72 days left in administration, and none of them are good. One would be incompetence or wrongdoing, which is not in the case with, Secretary Esper. Second would be vindictiveness, which would be an irresponsible way to treat our national security. That's a quote from her, and yeah, it would be irresponsible, but since when has Trump been responsible? And a third would be because the president wants to take actions that he believes the Secretary of Defense would refuse to take, which would be alarming. And I think the last option is the scariest. I think a lot of people in the United States right now are fearing, the worst, that Trump is going to do something rash and attempt a sort of authoritarian power grab, which is not a coup, because I have heard the word coup get thrown out there, but this is not a coup. This is different. This is turning a democracy into an autocracy, which is almost just as scary as a coup in a way. But on the brighter side of things, President-elect Joe Biden is not focusing on his opponent's negative mindset and turning his attention to the plans for the future. This week, he has collected a team for his coronavirus advisory board, and it's made up of actual public health officials, which is a stark contrast to Trump's coronavirus board. And this will aid the transition team to help implement the Biden-Harris COVID-19 plan into action. Biden also named Ron Klain as White House Chief of Staff. So the White House Chief of Staff's job is basically to oversee the executive office of the president and help build his team to help the president and vice president-elect handle the problems that are awaiting them. Ron Klain is, very, what's the word I'm looking for? He's very experienced in this position already because he has served as Biden's chief of staff when he was the vice president, along with chief counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And he was also an advisor on Biden's 1988 and 2008 presidential campaigns. It's very late here. I'm sorry. According to Biden, Klain has the capacity to work with people all across the political spectrum, which really ties into what I kind of talked about last week. about how, the next steps of the Biden-Harris transition team will be to figure out a plan to cater to, the progressive and extremists in this country, extreme conservatives, I should say, in this country, and this is obviously extremely hard. So finding, the right person to select the right people for Biden's cabinet is absolutely crucial, because you want people that will please both sides. And AOC has already come out and said that she supports Biden's decision in picking Ron Klain as his chief of staff, saying it was a very good decision. So that's a thumbs up from the progressive side. And the Democratic Party has really taken a hit this week from the progressive side. And so this was a really cool thing to see, kind of progressives and moderates coming together and agreeing, Ron Klain is a really good choice. Of course, you have some, leftists out in left field, if you don't mind my play on words there, that are, a little upset about, choosing what they claim is a quote-unquote lobbyist for asbestos. But Ron Klain really knows what he's doing, and I really look forward to seeing what else is going to come out of the Biden-Harris presidency, because this is only like week 1, and he's already coming right out the gate, attacking the problems where they are, attacking global trade. He's already communicating with a lot of our old allies and repairing a lot of bonds that were broken in the worldwide community. So that's really cool to see. And yeah, that's all for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will catch you guys next week.